Have you ever noticed that sometimes silence is louder than any argument? That the distance you create says more about you than 1,000 justifications? The power of walking away in silence is not escape, it's strength. It's an intimate declaration that you do not negotiate your own peace, even if it costs you silence, solitude, and courage. And before we begin this deep journey, subscribe to the channel, because here you learn to master what no one ever taught you, yourself. There are moments when your soul asks for mercy long before your mind admits it's tired. It's as if everything around you begins to feel heavy, and you realize that staying in the same place would be an act of violence against yourself. Silence, in that moment, is not absence. It's protection. It's your spirit lowering its weapons because it finally understood that some battles aren't worth the dust they raise. When you decide to step away, without announcing, without dramatizing, without trying to convince anyone, something changes. The energy you once spent trying to be understood transforms into clarity. You realize you don't need to prove anything, and that's when the power begins. Silent distancing is the most stoic act there is. It places you as the guardian of your own peace, not as a slave to other people's expectations. But here's the truth almost no one dares to admit. Silence bothers people. It exposes them. It reveals them. It shows who truly cared about you and who only cared about your presence, not your well-being. While some are confused by your silence, you begin to see life from angles the noise once hid. Stepping away gives you vision. Silence gives you sovereignty. And when you leave without warnings, without noise, without explanations, there's an elegance in that, an inner dignity. You are not running. You are closing cycles. You are not abandoning. You are preserving yourself. And self-preservation is the supreme art of emotional discipline. Marcus Aurelius said it well. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. And sometimes what the soul needs is not to endure more, but to endure less. If this makes sense to you, comment below. I choose my peace. And of course, subscribe to the channel, because this journey doesn't end here. You then realize that the act of walking away is not about who stays, it's about who you become after leaving. The world tries to convince you that silence is weakness, but the truth is the opposite. Silence is maturity. It is the wisdom born when you refuse to react to everything, when you understand your energy is limited and must be used with intention. Distance becomes the filter of your life. And there is something deeply transformative in realizing you no longer need to explain yourself. Explanations tie you to old versions of who you no longer are. When you go quiet, you free yourself from emotional chains others placed on you. Silence cuts ties that only existed because you were the one trying to hold together what was never meant to stand. Deep down, no one changes in the middle of noise. To change, you must withdraw. You must leave the world outside while you rebuild what is inside. Silence becomes a sacred temple where you confront your ego, your wounds, your fears, and discover a center within you that no one has ever touched. This is the Stoic power of introspection, the victory that happens without witnesses. And the more you learn to walk away, the more you realize life does not ask for explanations, only decisions. And silent decisions are usually the wisest ones. The world expects spectacle, arguments, drama, but you offer silence. And in that contrast, your strength appears, a strength that does not need to be seen to be real. In the end, you look back and realize that walking away was not loss, it was liberation. Liberation from excess, from weight, from anxiety, from the obligation to please. Silence brings you back to yourself, and that is more valuable than any external approval. And this is only the beginning, because there is far more strength hidden in quietness than you ever imagined. When you choose silence, something curious happens. Truth begins to surface. Everything that was once hidden behind improvised words now becomes clearer. You start seeing intentions, patterns, and even the places where you were betraying yourself without realizing it. Silence illuminates without shouting. It reveals without accusing. It turns you into an observer of your own life. And in that space of quietness, you begin to hear what the noise had been drowning out: your limits. That exhaustion you ignored for months, maybe years. That inner voice telling you something was wrong, and yet you insisted on staying. Silence does not bring ready-made answers. It brings a mirror. And sometimes that mirror is frightening, because it shows parts of you preferred not to see. By walking away in silence, you discover something even more powerful. Those who truly valued you never disappear. Those who were genuine do not need a warning. Distance exposes fragile bonds and strengthens real ones. You begin to see that the intensity of a relationship is not in the speeches, but in the silent presence. The kind of presence that exists even when you are far away. And deep down, this process matures you. Silence teaches you to build an inner world where other people's opinions occupy far less space than your own peace. It shows you that you don't need to answer everything. You don't need to join every argument. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. It is almost a rebirth, and rebirth rarely happens in crowds. It happens in silence. If this speaks to you, comment now. Silence strengthens me. And of course, subscribe to the channel to continue on this journey. The most interesting part is realizing your worth was never dependent on anyone's attention. It was always there, waiting for you to stop begging for recognition so you could finally see it. Distance returns that dignity to you. The dignity of knowing you don't need to beg to be seen or sacrifice yourself to be accepted. With time, you learn that stepping away is not disappearing. It is rediscovering yourself. You do not withdraw because you gave up, but because you are choosing a path where your balance is the priority. And when you make this decision calmly, without tears, without speeches, only with conviction, you realize true strength is never loud. It is still, steady, almost invisible. Silence also teaches you that some pains don't need to be explained. They only need to be understood by you. And when you stop trying to justify your choices, the weight that suffocated your chest begins to dissolve. You become lighter, more aware, more whole. It feels like letting go of a rope that has been burning your hands for years. And then comes a special moment, small and subtle. The moment you realize you are finally at peace. Not because everything got better, but because you stopped fighting battles that were never yours. You become selective, intentional, serene, and that serenity is a power no one can take away from you. In the end, silence is not a refuge, it is sovereign territory. It is where you rebuild your identity, realign your priorities, and recover the emotional strength the world tried and failed to steal from you. And when you return different, clearer, stronger, more yourself. Life has a strange way of revealing who you are when you decide to step away from the chaos. Suddenly, everything that seemed urgent loses its force, and what truly matters begins to breathe again. When you choose to walk away in silence, you're not just leaving something behind. You are opening space for something new to bloom inside you. It is an inner movement, invisible but profoundly transformative. You realize that the world around you is driven by impulsive reactions, fast responses, constant stimuli, but you now learn to exist at another rhythm, a deeper, more conscious, almost ancestral rhythm. It is as if you become the guardian of your own time. And guarding your time is guarding your life, because no one survives when they surrender everything to the world's noise. Silent distancing also reveals a brutal truth. Few people can handle your evolution. Some become uncomfortable because they no longer have emotional access to you. Others drift away because they realize they no longer have power over you. Silence breaks emotional dependencies that once felt natural. And when those dependencies fall, you finally breathe fully again. Each silent decision protects a piece of you that was once too exposed. Each step away from drama, excess, pressure is a step back toward yourself. Silence becomes the invisible wall that guards your mind. It does not isolate you. It refines you. It adjusts you. It realigns you with who you really are. If this resonates with you, comment now, "I protect my peace." And subscribe to the channel to continue this transformation. Because when you walk away, you begin to see that the energy you spent trying to be understood could have been used to understand yourself. And that changes everything. Your perspective becomes cleaner, sharper, freer. Other people's opinions stop being walls and become background noise. You realize you can move forward without needing approval, and that is liberating. Distance also shows you that nothing can truly hurt you when you master your response. What hurts is not the event itself, but the emotional space you give it. And when you begin to control that space, you become almost unreachable to external chaos. You build an inner fortress, a silent, unshakable one. Inside that fortress, you revisit your story, your choices, your mistakes, but without guilt, without hurry, without self-sabotage. You revisit to learn, not to punish yourself. And the more you learn, the more you understand that walking away is not giving up. It is strategy. It is the act of someone who finally understands their own worth. Silence also teaches you that healing is slow but deep. And to heal, you must disconnect from what wounded you. You cannot heal in the same place where you bled. Distance is the bridge between who you were and who you can still become. And when that bridge is complete, you realize silence did not just protect you, it prepared you. It prepared you to return to the world with a new structure, a new gaze, a new strength. A strength that does not need to be spoken, because it is felt. A strength born of quietness, grown through distance, and confirmed by your new presence. There comes a moment when you understand life does not ask for haste, it asks for presence. And in silence, presence becomes absolute. When you move away from noise, you begin to notice things you never saw before. The quality of your thoughts, the weight of your emotions, the real direction of your life. Silence opens doors that noise keeps locked. It gives you access to what is essential. The more you distance yourself from chaos, the more you realize how much you were living on autopilot. Reacting without thinking, staying without wanting, speaking without feeling. Silence slows everything down, and when things slow down, truth appears. The truth of who you are, what you want, and what no longer makes sense. It feels like returning home after years lost inside yourself. And in that return, you find something you didn't know you needed. Space. Space to breathe, to feel, to reorganize what was disordered, to clear what was accumulated. Silence cleans the soul like rain cleans a city after gray days. It removes excesses you didn't even know you carried. It makes you light again. And that is a power like no other. When you choose not to react, not to confront, not to insist, you learn one of the greatest Stoic virtues, inner mastery. You realize everything that happens outside you is just scenery. The real stage is within, and mastering that stage is what separates the person who drowns in their emotions from the one who crosses storms with an almost inexplicable calm. That calm is born in silence. If this touches your heart, comment, "I choose the silence that strengthens me." And remember, subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-knowledge. The most curious thing is realizing that the more you distance yourself, the more you see that you didn't need what once felt indispensable. The validation you chased, the chaos you tolerated, the affection you begged for, all become small compared to the stability silence offers. The peace you find in yourself surpasses any presence you once tried to keep by force. And at the same time, silence teaches you that there are things you cannot control. And that's okay. Lack of control is not failure. It is freedom. Marcus Aurelius often said, "Peace begins when you decide not to let anything external disturb you." And that decision is not made with shouting, but with a firm, almost sacred quietness. A quietness that only appears when you step away from storms that are not yours. Distance is also a test. It reveals whether your strength is real or just a facade, because when you stop distracting yourself with the world, you come face to face with yourself, whole, raw, honest. And that meeting is not always comfortable, but it is essential. Only those who face themselves in silence can truly rebuild. Silence is the teacher that shows you what no one dared to say. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Silence reminds you of this constantly. It teaches you that maturity is not winning arguments. It is not needing them. That strength is not controlling everything. It is controlling yourself. That peace is not the absence of problems, but the absence of reactivity. This wisdom is rarely born in noise. It is almost always born in retreat. With time, you begin to protect your silence as if it were a rare treasure, because you realize everything you built inside it, clarity, strength, emotional stability, is too valuable to waste in places that do not help you grow. And when you reach this point, something changes forever. You learn to choose yourself without guilt, without fear, and without hesitation. There comes a moment when silence stops being protection and becomes rebirth. It is when you realize you are not just escaping noise, you are emerging into a new version of yourself. A version that no longer rushes, no longer panics, no longer twists itself to fit into places it was never meant to be. Silence reshapes you. It dissolves you so you can rebuild with more truth and more strength. You start to feel you are carrying less weight, fewer expectations, fewer imposed urgencies. What once pressured you now feels distant, almost irrelevant. You begin to breathe deeper, think clearer, walk more consciously. Silence, once empty, becomes fertile ground, and in it, something begins to bloom, something that had been waiting years to emerge. And in this inner blooming, you understand the value of having walked away. Because if you had stayed in the noise, you would have missed your soul calling you to change. Quietness allowed you to hear that voice, a voice that does not shout or demand, a calm, ancient, deep voice. A voice that was always there, but only becomes clear when you finally decide to listen. The most impressive part is that this transformation does not need to be announced. You don't need to post, explain, justify. You simply become different. Your choices change, your limits change, your energy changes. You move with more purpose, more steadiness, more emotional elegance. Silence gave you structure, and that structure now supports everything you want to build. If this touched you, comment now. I am reborn in silence. And subscribe to the channel if you want to keep evolving consciously. With time, you also realize silence did not push the right people away. It only removed the wrong ones. Those who were bothered by your quietness were exactly the ones who fed on your imbalance. Those who remained are those who recognize the value of your peace. Silence creates this natural selection. No confrontation, no resentment, no exhaustion, only clarity. You also begin to understand that not everything deserves a response, and truthfully, almost nothing does. Most conflicts arise from insisting on reacting to things that need no reaction. And in silence, you develop this sacred discernment, not to waste your energy on small battles, to save your strength for what truly matters, to guard your vitality like something precious. Gradually, the old version of you, anxious, reactive, restless, begins to fade. Not because you forced yourself to change, but because the noise that fed that version no longer exists. Silence dissolved the roots of your impulsiveness, and in its place grew something far stronger, self-control, the most powerful weapon a person can carry. And when you return to the world, you return transformed. The same situations that once broke you now pass by like wind. The same people who once played with your emotions now find no doorway into you. The same provocations that once shook you now get lost in your serenity. That is the power of silence. It does not change the world, it changes you. And when you change, everything around you must adjust. In the end, you understand silence was not a pause. It was preparation, not weakness, strategy, not escape, evolution. And this evolution does not need to be announced. It is felt, noticed, lived. Because those who learn to walk away in silence become people no one can control anymore. People who belong to themselves, people who are whole. And that kind of strength no one can take from you. In the end, you realize silence was not just a path, it was the mirror that showed you who you truly are. And now that you know this firmer, calmer, clearer version of yourself, the question becomes inevitable. What will you do with this strength? Will you continue betraying yourself to fit in, or will you finally choose yourself without fear? How many versions of you still need to be left behind before you step into the one you were born to be? Perhaps true freedom is this: walking through the world without letting the world walk inside you, silencing what distorts you, honoring what strengthens you, protecting what builds you, and above all, recognizing that peace was never something you had to seek outside. Peace was always something you had to cultivate within. If this message spoke to you, comment below what touched you the most. Like, share, and subscribe, because your evolution is only beginning, and you deserve to witness it all.